Wasn't sure I was going to get rid of her. I've had that problem before. My name's Rick. I'm alcoholic. It's good to be here tonight. See all of you. I'd like to thank Camille for sticking her neck out and asking me to come here and talk with you folks tonight, visit with you. I appreciate it. I always feel woefully inadequate at carrying our message. It'd be easy for me to stand up here and tell you my story tonight, but I believe that we have a much higher responsibility than that. That our responsibility is to carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I hope over the course of the next hour, for you new guys, maybe the next hour and 45 minutes. I'm just kidding you, really. I hope that I can do that. I hope God uses me to carry our message. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I haven't talked about this for a while since I've been at a podium, but I had a guy explain to me when I was sober about 6 years what that meant. And he showed me a circle and a triangle. It used to be on the front page, the title page of the book Alcoholics Anonymous, and there was a triangle with a circle around it. And the bottom of that triangle said recovery. The left side facing me said unity, and the right side facing me said service. And this guy spent an afternoon talking with me about that, and explaining to me that for each side of that triangle, there was a set of principles that were spiritual in their nature for me to practice. And if I practiced those things, I would get the full benefits of Alcoholics Anonymous. But I was sober. I'd been in AA about 6 years, going to a lot of meetings, and I'm sitting there listening to him, and he says that there's 36 principles for us to apply to get the benefits of AA, and I'm doing a little math, right? And I'm thinking, well, I kind of did the first step, and I wrote a little bit of an inventory and talked to somebody about it. Hell, I do a lot of 12-step, and so I got 4 out of the 36. So, wow, there's a whole lot left for me to experience in AA. See, that was important to me at that time, because about 6 years after my last drink, I wasn't feeling real good. I wasn't doing real well. Right? I was thinking that I might be better off, and that the folks... She's back. She's trying to get me to drink something. It might work. But anyway, I found out that there was more to AA than I'd been experiencing. That going to meetings and not drinking didn't treat alcoholism. Right? There's more to it than that. That I'd heard a lot of things that, well, they weren't really. We can hear a lot of things in AA that ain't really AA. And I'd like to tell you a joke so you don't think that I'm just a big stick in the mud. You're in for a treat, because I only got 3 jokes and I'm recycling them, right? There's a traveling salesman, and he was traveling through Iowa, up where I live. And he threw a belt off of his car. And he goes to the farmer's house that's up the road, and he asks the farmer, he says, you wouldn't happen to have any fan belts laying around that might fit in my car? The farmer says, well, I don't know. He says, let's get my pickup, we'll pull your car up here and we'll check it out. So they pull his car up in the lot. Farmer says, I think I got a belt here that we can get the tightener, we can get the slack adjuster to work, and everything will be fine. We'll be able to get you into town, into Des Moines. This traveling salesman was also an amateur ventriloquist. And he says to this farmer, he says, what do I owe you for getting me on the road? The farmer, like most country folks, said, don't worry about it. It's a pleasure to help you. The guy says, well, I got to give you something. The farmer said, no, I don't want anything. He says, well, how about if if I give you a little treat here? He said, I'm an amateur ventriloquist, and I'll put a little show on for you. And the farmer says, what's a ventriloquist? And the guy says, well, just let me show you. He says, are those your cows over there? And the farmer said, yeah, they're my cows. And the salesman yells at him, hey, cows, how do you like it here with this farm? The guy throws his voice like ventriloquists do, and he said, the cows answer back, oh, just great here. He said, we got a great barn, got big pasture we got to go in. There's lots of grass for us to eat. And just couldn't be, if you're going to be a cow, this is the place to be one. Farmer was a little surprised because he had never heard the cows talk before. So then he says, are those your pigs? The farmer says, yeah, them are my pigs. I said, hey, pigs, how do you like it here with this farmer? Ventriloquist throws his voice. Oh, you got a great mud lot here that we can go lay in. He brings us slops us twice a day. This is the place to be a pig. This guy is the best farmer to be a pig for. The farmer's feeling pretty good about himself. He didn't know that these animals loved him that much. And the ventriloquist said, them your sheep over there? He says, yeah, but you can't believe a thing they say. Thank you. That does my heart good. I've been sober all day today and every day since July 3rd, 1986. I mean, I'm not a miracle. I'm not a miracle. Alcoholics Anonymous is a miracle. I was hurting enough, scared enough, and I guess fragile enough to do just about anything anybody said to me so that I didn't have to be me anymore. That was half my life ago. Hell, I'm a grandpa. That's quite a deal. You know, that farmer, he was hearing things that weren't real. And for a while, when I came to AA, I heard some stuff that's not real. Tonight, I hope to share with you the truth about alcoholism as I experienced it, and as I understand it to be described in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. And I hope to share with you the solution that Alcoholics Anonymous is as I've experienced it and as it's explained in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. You see, I thought that I was alcoholic, and I thought I was a drug addict. And I attended meetings for 5 or 6 years. 6 meetings a week on the average. I got married when I was sober about 1.5 years. I always feel a duty to the new people here to tell this story. Because here's what happened. In a general way. I was sober about 1 year. And I got a phone call from a girl, which wasn't really all that unusual, right? I used to have real teeth and was good looking and young, right? Now I get up here and I'm scared my teeth are going to fly out. If they do, catch them. I'm a little short on money. I need them. So this girl calls me and says, I just got out of a treatment center. Would you mind meeting me at the meeting tonight or taking me to the meeting? I said, I'll do whatever you want, right? And I was sincere. I just wanted to help her. I'd known her since I was 9 years old. We'd done a little bit of drinking together. And so she says, well, just meet me at the meeting. So we met at the meeting. I went and did the meeting. After the meeting was over, we were standing around talking. I said, well, what'd you think of that? And she said, well, that was okay. It was all right. She said, they're good people. I said, yeah, they are good people. I said, what are you going to do now? Now, you know, it was back in the 80s, and I'm not sure either one of us had jobs or had to work the next day. But she said, well, I don't have anything planned. And I said, well, you want to go get an ice cream cone or something? And she said, sure, that sounds like fun. What do you think about me moving in? Yeah, you laugh. It can happen. Yeah. We got married about 6 months later. She had 2 little kids, and they call me Dad today. Her and I are divorced. We were married 18 years, and we got divorced. And I was able to go through that divorce without making a bigger mess. I didn't go poop on her porch or nothing, right? Able to handle it with some dignity and some integrity because of this thing, because of this. After we'd been married for about 6 months, I think was when I made my first trip to a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And over the course of the next 5 years, I started going to see psychiatrists and psychologists. I'd never seen one in my life. I started going to see marriage counselors. When I was about 5 years sober, I spent about 3 weeks up in Minnesota at a treatment center called Hazelton. It wasn't that I wasn't willing to get well. It's just that attending meetings and continuing to come back and just not drink doesn't change the essence of who I am. The absence of alcohol doesn't treat my alcoholism. When I was sober about 6 years, we had a speaker come into Muscatine, and I ended up spending some time with him over the course of the weekend. And we went to lunch on Saturday, and we're eating lunch, and he says, how long you been sober, Rick? And I said, 5 years and 10 months. And he says, wow. He said, that's a long time. He said, a guy that's been sober 5 years and 10 months, he knows a lot about himself and about alcoholism, about AA. Yeah, hell yeah, I guess I do. I guess I do know a lot. He says, yeah. He says, you probably know just about enough to be dangerous to yourself and anybody that'll listen to you. And then he told me something that I tell you today, I stand before you today, that is the absolute truth. What he said to me changed my life. He held up his coffee cup, and he said, if everything that you know about alcoholism and about Alcoholics Anonymous and about yourself and about God will fit in this coffee cup, how big of a container will it take to hold what you don't know? He said, what you don't know is what's going to set you free. What you know becomes a trap. It's like it becomes a noose around my neck. And I'm not willing to grow past beyond what I know. I become attached to it. My agnosticism becomes so powerful that I can't set aside those ideas that were once based in truth, based in spiritual truth. But I take ownership of them. My ego starts to use them, and alcoholism becomes active in my life again. He asked me what step I was working, and I was in a bind. I figured ninth step would be a good place for a guy like me to be. I said, I'm having a little bit of trouble with this ninth step. And I can't really seem to do it. I don't really get God too much. I don't understand God. And he says to me, do you really want to talk about this, or do you just want to have a nice, quiet lunch? And I said, no, I really want to talk about this. And he set his fork down. And what he said to me was, the reason you're having trouble with the ninth step is because you've never made a list of all the people that you're consciously aware of that you've created harm in their lives and become willing to go to those people. He said the reason you haven't done that is because you've never humbly asked God to remove the shortcomings within yourself. You haven't done that because you've never become willing, really become willing to have God change you. You haven't done that because you've never truly admitted to God in the presence of another human being the exact nature of your wrongs. He said, the reason I think you haven't done that is because you've never really taken a searching and fearless moral inventory of yourself. And he said, and I don't think you've done that because you haven't abandoned your life to God. He said, the reason I think you haven't done that is because you don't believe that God can take you to a place of sanity. And you don't believe that because you're not convinced that you're powerless over alcohol and that your life is in fact unmanageable. And I kind of wanted to break his notes. By the end of that weekend, I asked him if he could show me how to do what it is that he'd done. You see, what happened to me that weekend was what they describe on page 18 of the book, Alcoholics Anonymous. They talk about a fellow who has an illness like me, and that this illness affects those around me in a way that no other illness has. If I had cancer, people would feel sorry for me and accept my frailties. But with alcoholism, they don't accept my frailties. They don't accept my shortcomings. They don't accept my violent outbursts. They don't accept my temper tantrums. They don't accept my emotional instability. And I become isolated. And as I go to the psychiatrists and the psychologists, they find it really hard to get me to talk about who I really am without any reservation. And when I go to the preacher on the rare occasion, he finds it even more difficult than the doctor does. And oddly enough, they say close friends and family members find it even more unapproachable than even the doctors or the preachers do. I don't trust people. The bottom line is I don't trust people. I don't trust you. I don't trust that you've been where I've been, that you've done what I've done, that you've seen what I've seen, that you've felt what I've felt. I don't trust that you've experienced the shame that I have, that you live with the fear that I live with every day. I don't trust that you know what it's like to be in a world of shame where I continue to do things that I swore I would never do, even in the absence of alcohol. And on that day, that guy convinced me that he knew. It says on page 18 that the ex-problem drinker who is armed with the facts about himself and who has found this solution can win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. But until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. And that guy, he gained my confidence that day. He gave me his phone number. He said, call me Monday. He lived in Los Angeles. I have no opinion on whether long-range sponsorship works or not. I think it works just fine as long as you don't get much further apart than Akron, Ohio, and New York City. Right? I burn up my cell phone bill now for an entire family with a share everything plan is less money than my Ma Bell bill was in 1992. I talked to this guy constantly. I called him that following Monday. And when he answered the phone, I said, Joe, this is Rick out in Iowa. And he giggled. I said, why are you giggling at me? And he said, if I give my phone number out 100 times a year, he said, maybe 10 of those guys will call me. So he said, here's what I want you to do. He said, I want you to spend the next 3 or 4 days considering 3 things. And he said, do you understand what a consideration is? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, let me explain it to you. Thanks. He's obviously hearing impaired, right? So he says a consideration is taking a question and it's sitting in the middle of it. It's not coming up with an immediate answer. It's looking at your experience to help you to determine what that answer is. He said, I'd like you to consider if you're willing to let go of old ideas. And I'd like you to consider if you're willing to let go of lifelong conceptions. Right? I'd like you to consider if you're willing to let go of old prejudice. He said, call me Thursday. He never asked me to stop considering those things. And I called him that Thursday. He answered the phone. I said, Joe, this is Rick out in Iowa. Hey. I said, why are you laughing at me? He said, well, because if I give my phone number out 100 times a year, maybe 10 guys call me. And out of those 10 guys, maybe one of them calls me the second time. He said, you must really be fouled up. And he said, the first thing we got to do is we got to find out if you have alcoholism. I said, what do you think, the last 6 years has been a joke or what? And he said, well, just because you're in AA, that doesn't mean you're alcoholic. And I said, well, I drank every day for 4 years before I got to AA. He said, that doesn't mean you're alcoholic. I said, well, what's it mean? He said, maybe you were bored. And everything that I brought to him, he shut it down. And I said, how am I going to find out? And he said, well, I thought you'd never ask. He said, it's the purpose of our book to answer such questions specifically. He said, we're going to go through the doctor's opinion in the first 8 pages of Bill's story. And we're going to look at pages 17 to 23 and then pages 23 to 43, all to figure out if you're powerless over alcohol. And he started talking to me about an allergy to alcohol. As we went through the doctor's opinion and I started to get turned on to the message of Alcoholics Anonymous, I started to find out what was truly wrong with me. And when we got to the part, we get to a part where he says, do you think that you have this allergy? Do you think that when you start to drink that it produces a craving for liquor that goes beyond your mental control? And I said, well, I think so. He said, well, you need to be convinced of this. See, for a long time, I thought that I drank the way that I drank because I was trying to run from reality. I was trying to escape reality because it's like I said in our book, because I was maladjusted to life or because I was an outright mental defective. And he did a great thing with me. He says, part of the time you probably were, but he said, I want you to think if you were ever at any place at a time where you were doing what you wanted to do with who you wanted to be doing it with, everything's hitting on all 8 cylinders and things are going good. And I thought about a night that I walked into a bar in Muscatine with my girlfriend Lisa was hanging on my arm. I had $400 in my pocket. It's 1982 or 83. I'm driving a brand new pickup truck. I walk in the back door of the bar, and it's a late spring, early summer Friday night, about 7 o'clock in the evening. The doors are open. The bar's packed. It's a little corner bar, but it was a happening place, and it was packed. And I walked in the back door, and it was like Norm walking into Cheers, right? And there's 5 or 6 guys. I was a young iron worker, and there's 5 or 6 guys in my crew that was in there. And I had Lisa hanging on my arm, prettiest girl in the county. And she was a drunkard's dream if I ever seen one. I got a pocket full of money. I'm driving a brand new car. I'm surrounded by guys that love me, and I love them. They're like big brothers to me, all of them. And there ain't nobody that I would have rather been that night than me. Nobody. And Joe said, did you start to drink? And I said, yeah. And he said, could you control your drinking any more that night than you could the nights that you were sitting alone in your apartment, trying to drink away the fear, trying to drink away the isolation, trying to drink away the terror and the desperation that you had? And I went, whoa. He said, your emotional state has nothing to do with why you drank the way that you drank. You drank the way you drank because of an allergy. And there's a paragraph in the doctor's opinion that says that Dr. Silkworth had worked with these guys, these certain guys that he had worked with that had been working on a problem or a business deal for several months that were going to get settled one day, and it was going to be a good day for them, a good deal. They were going to make a lot of money. There was something they were going to profit from. And these guys started to drink sometime prior to the closing of the deal. And once they started to drink, they didn't make the appointment. And Joe says, did you ever have that go on? And I said, dude, about the closest I came to a business deal was getting car insurance. Okay? And I traveled pretty lightly. I didn't really have many problems. If problems happened, I just got away from you. Except her, and she keeps coming back. And he says, well, why don't you pray, ask God to show you any experiences that you may have with that. And I'm going to share this one with you because it's the truth. It's the story. It's the thing, the one experience that I came up with 3 or 4 days later. And I called him up and he said, have you come up with an experience where you'd had something you'd been working on for a long time? I said, it's the only thing I can think of, but I don't think it's what you're looking for. And he said, what is it? And I said, well, there was this girl that worked at the bank. And I wanted to go out with her. And I'd go in and flirt with her. Every other Friday, I'd go in, cash my check. About half of the Fridays, I cash my check in the tavern. The other half, I'd cash them at the bank. And I'd go in and I'd call her baby and darling and sweetheart. And where you say, me and you go out and paint the town red tonight. And she'd count my money out and say, no. I'd go in and I'd become more and more inventive with my approach to her. She'd still say no. And I want you to imagine now it's late July or early August, 1983 or 84. Sultry. I'm tan. I mean, I'm looking good, right? Long blonde hair that looks a lot like, who's that prince on Shrek? That guy? Looked a lot like him, right? Prince Charming, right? Looked a lot like him. And I'm wearing, I hardly ever wore a shirt. But to go in the bank, of course, I'd have to put on a wife beater or a sleeveless T-shirt. And there was no air conditioning in the truck, so when I walked in the bank that day, I was glistening, right? And she still shut me down, right? And at that point, I'm starting to wonder about her sexual orientation, right? I mean, how do you put that off forever, right? I mean, I'm looking good. And a few weeks later, I went in and asked her if she'd go out with me, and she said, yeah, I'll go out with you tomorrow night. And the next day, I was nervous because she was a nice girl. And it had been a while since I'd went on a real date with a nice girl. And quite frankly, it has still been a while since I've been. That's my sex inventory, but we'll talk about that later maybe, right? So I was nervous. And before I got in the shower, I drank a beer. And when I got out of the shower, I drank a beer. And before I left my apartment to go get her, I drank another beer. I'm not sure about that. But I am sure that on my way to go pick her up, I stopped at a convenience store and I picked up a 6-pack. And I drank one of those beers on the way to go get her. And I went to her house and I picked her up. She lived out in the country. And we got in the truck and backed out of her mom and dad's driveway. And I'm driving down the road and going between second and third gear and reach behind the seat of my truck and pull out a beer and I hand it to her. And she says, no, thank you. And I want to tell you, as good as I was looking with the tan and the long blonde hair, she looked just as good with the tan and the long dark hair, right? And the white short shorts and the tank top. And when she said, no, thank you, I said, suit yourself. And I popped the top on the beer, and then she said, and I wish that you wouldn't drink while you were with me. And I said, I looked at her, and I just said, baby, this ain't going to work out. And I turned the truck around, and I took her home. And the guy on the other end of the phone is laughing, right? And I'm thinking, man, I flunked the alcoholic test. He said, no, you didn't flunk it. He said, Rick, I got a pretty good idea what made your world go round when you were 22 or 23 years old. And he said, and I think pretty girls did that. He said, let me ask you something. If you hadn't started to drink that night, that afternoon, and your partner before you go pick her up, you think you would have went out with her, ate supper, and went on a date and had a good time? I said, sure. He said, it might have even ended up real well for you that night, right? That's, yeah, probably. Yeah. I never did lack in confidence, right? And he said, then what changed? What changed when she asked you not to drink that beer? And what I said to him was, Joe, I was drinking. And when I drank, I drank. And in that moment, I knew that when I drink to overcome a craving that goes beyond my mental control. And that I've been like that since I was 14 or 15 years old. That when I start to drink, I drink. I knew that. I didn't know anything about an allergy, but I knew that I'd drink. And I found out that day what was wrong with me. That I am alcoholic. That I'm as seriously alcoholic as they come. We moved on to pages 23 to 43 where we talked about the condition of the mind. That's that state of alcoholic insanity that happens in between drinks. Where I can't recall the suffering and the humiliation of a week or a month ago. That at certain times I'm without defense against the first drink. And I thought about all of the days that I'd went to work so sick, so hungover, so violently ill that I was an iron worker. I built buildings, and sometimes I would vomit off of those buildings. Swearing that, one of the great things, we used to ride the headache ball of the crane up on the iron, right? And if we knew one of us was a little puny, a little green in the gills, we used to say, right? If you grab a hold of the hook of that headache ball when two guys are standing on it and the ball gets up to about here, you shut the operator off, grab that ball and start doing this. And that thing will start to spin, and then you run like all get out. And I'd think about those days where I'd be saying, man, I ain't drinking tonight. Not tonight. I'm going straight home. And by noon, I'd be able to choke down a chili cheese dog off the gut wagon. And by 4 o'clock, I'd say, well, I'm just going to drink a couple on the way home. And then that couple would get me thirsty. And I started to see that inability to recall the suffering and the humiliation was a matter of hours for me. That I couldn't bring into my mind a reason to not drink at the time I most desperately needed it. It made sense of what happened to me. I had a cousin that got killed in a motorcycle wreck in May of 1986. I was living in Orlando. And I wasn't having real good relations with my folks. I'll tell you a little story about that. My folks had come to Orlando. I'd moved to Orlando in January 1985, and my folks came to see me sometime in 1985. I don't remember when. And they came down. They were going to spend 2 weeks in Orlando, and they showed up. And I met them at a Pizza Hut, and I got really drunk at the Pizza Hut. And they said I took Friday off of work, and we went and did some things and seen some things, and I got drunk while we were doing some stuff. And on Saturday we went to SeaWorld, and they served cute little drinks with rum in them and umbrellas, and I got drunk at SeaWorld. And on Sunday morning, they showed up at my apartment about 8 o'clock and said, we're going to Cape Kennedy. And I know that the thinking was they don't sell beer at Cape Kennedy. So we get over to Cape Kennedy about 9 o'clock in the morning. It's Sunday morning. And I see a concession stand there, and there's a Budweiser sign in the window. And I walk over to the concession stand, and I say to the guy that's in there, I said, is that sign real? And he said, yeah. And I said, when are you open? He said, right about now. And I said, I'll take 2 of the biggest Budweisers you got. And I passed out in the IMAX theater with my mom and dad. Mom and dad took me home, dropped me off at my apartment, and came back about 30 minutes later. And my dad came in my apartment and he was crying. And he said, "We're going home." He said, "I can't stand to watch you kill yourself." He said, "Don't ever call me again. I won't accept your collect calls anymore." My mom said he cried all the way to Atlanta. See, our relations weren't real good. So when my cousin got killed, Dad called me at work on the phone, and all he said to me was, "Your cousin Jeff got killed last night. I don't know when the funeral is. I thought you'd want to know. See you later." And so I got a ticket and I flew home. And he was in the Air Force, and his body got home from California about a week later. And when we went down to Eldon to go to his funeral, we got to my aunt and uncle's house. And my cousin's little brother, Jack, was in the Navy. And we got the Uncle Art and Aunt Marilyn's, and Jack wasn't there. And I said, "Where's Jack?" And they said, "He's downtown," which meant he was at a beer joint. I said, "I'll go get him." And my dad said, "No, like hell you will." And I got mad because Dad thought that I was using that as an excuse to go get drunk. And I'm telling you, I didn't want to drink that day as bad as any day in my life. I've never wanted to drink. There wasn't much sacred in my life. There wasn't much that I valued in my life. There wasn't much holy in my life. But the closest I could come to it was my little cousin's funeral. And I wasn't going to go to my cousin's funeral drunk. There was something bad wrong about that within me. And I was what you folks call spiritually bankrupt and all that stuff. I didn't have very high moral standards. But that was unthinkable to me. And I convinced my dad of that. He said, "Well, go get him." And I went down there. I'm not going to drink. And I walk in the bar. And I said, "Come on, cuz, let's go do this thing." And he says, "Have a drink with me, cuz." And I said, "No, man, let's go. We got to go do this." And he said, "Have a drink with me for Jeff." And I said, "Okay." And I drank 4 or 5 rum and cokes in there with him. And then we went back to the church. Man, I don't know that I've ever felt more terrible than I felt that day. Because I knew that there was nothing that was strong enough to keep me away from booze. There was nothing to make me stop drinking. Nothing at all. And I'm going to drink till the day that I die. There's nothing going to get in the way of it. And I knew, based on that day, that I could never rely on myself to keep me from drinking. I knew on that day that things like "play the tape through" that I would hear for years after that, those don't apply to me. Because at certain times I lacked the ability to be able to play that tape all the way through. And once I realized that, I came to the conclusion that I may need spiritual help with this. That I may need help, not to protect me from alcohol, but to protect me from myself. We looked at the unmanageability of my life, not the circumstantial stuff that goes on out here, but the internal condition within me, that spiritual malady that's in the core of my being, that hole in my gut that's about the size of a football that had been there since I was about 6 years old. And this guy takes me to page 52 of our book. And there's a paragraph there that says we had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems the same readiness to change our point of view. We were having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional nature. We were a prey to misery and depression. We had a feeling of uselessness. We couldn't make a living. We were full of fear. We couldn't seem to be a real help to other people. We were unhappy. And he says to me, "Is this stuff going on with you right now?" And I said, "Hell, don't want to go on with everybody?" And he said, "No, Rick." He said, "Those are the symptoms of untreated alcoholism." And he said, "I bet if we look back at your life," he said, "I bet we're going to find out that stuff was going on with you before you ever drank." And that night, I laid in bed and I looked back. I thought about my first conscious memory of hiding behind a toilet. The details don't matter. But at 3 years old, I had about 6 of those things going on with me. And by the time I got to kindergarten, I had all of them going on with me. besides making a living. By the time I was in junior high, they were all on me. And I didn't know it because I didn't know anything any different. It's the only thing that I knew, right? I didn't know anything any different. But I could look back 20 years later and see that at 12 years old, I was having trouble with personal relationships. I didn't know who I was supposed to be with people, how I was supposed to be with people. Everything was a mystery to me. I couldn't control my emotions. My emotions dominated me. They dictated what I did and how I acted and where I went or where I didn't go. I was so full of fear that everything was terrifying to me. I was a prey to misery and depression at 12 and 13 years old. I had a feeling of uselessness. I knew that I couldn't really do anything right or anything good. I knew I was never going to be any good at anything. There was nothing. I just was pretty useless. Right? I'd like to be a good baseball player, but I'm going to commit an error in the bottom of the sixth. And in Little League, you play 6 or 7 innings, and in the bottom of the sixth, I'm going to be the guy that drops the ball and lets them score. And I lived with that stuff. I knew it. I knew that's what's going to happen. If I'm on the track team and I'm running a relay, I'm going to be the guy that drops the baton or trips. And one night I spent the night at my buddy Billy's house between the summer of 7th and 8th grade. And he stole a bunch of beer from his dad. And on that night, I got to experience the effect that alcohol has on me. And it changed my life forever. My life was never the same after that. Because what happened to me that night after 5 or 6 beers, I laid on the floor of that hot garage attic. The end of July 1973. 5 or 6 beers in me. I got a set of stereo speakers on each side of my head and Jethro Tull's Aqualung album playing. And I was at peace. I didn't get bigger and stronger and tougher and faster. I just didn't care. It didn't matter to me. And I think it was for the first time in my life that I was ever at peace. From the time that I was a very little boy, I wasn't scared. First time. I wasn't concerned about what folks thought of me. I wasn't concerned that I wasn't good. Just leave me alone and let me drink. And then I got really, really sick. And the next time that I drank a year later, exactly the same thing happened to me. And the next time that I drank 6 months later, exactly the same thing happened to me. And what I realized that day in working with Joe was that alcohol was not the problem. Alcohol was the solution for me. If it wasn't for the effect that alcohol had on me in those formative years of 15 and 16 and 17, there's a really good chance I would have become a statistic of teen suicide. Because I needed that relief that alcohol brought me. The pressures of adolescence were too strong for me. I failed miserably at it. And then some jerks would say, "How you doing, kid?" Right? Some guy that's 30 years old who's got 3 kids and a wife and a mortgage, and he's going, "Man, you enjoy this. It's the best years of your life." Going, dude. Say it ain't so. If you're a teenager here, it ain't so. I'm 53 years old. I graduated from high school in 1978, and the world didn't end then. It got better. Right? I needed that effect produced by alcohol or I wouldn't have made it. The problem is I'm allergic to this stuff, and when I drink it, it produces a craving for more booze so I don't get nothing else done. And what this guy tells me is that if we get that stuff on page 52 treated, I'm probably never going to drink again. He said if we treat that stuff, those are the symptoms of untreated alcoholism. And if we treat untreated alcoholism, the symptoms go away, and drinking is one of the symptoms. I'm here to tell you tonight that if we're alcoholic and we're here, that stuff on page 52 is what needs to get treated. That it's 6 years after coming to AA, that stuff wasn't treated. And I couldn't understand why. I'd watched people go out and drink and go out and relapse. And I didn't think about drinking. I thought about blowing my head off. And I couldn't understand why until I found the truth about it. And the truth about it is that I knew that if I drink again, I'm never coming back here. Because I've done everything here that you guys have asked me to do. And if I drink again, it's going to be a long period of me alienating everybody and everything in my life that means anything to me. And it's going to break their heart. And I just saw that as being a terrifying, long, drawn-out process that may last 2 or 3 years. And I didn't want to go through that. Would rather just pull the trigger and get it over with now. This guy said, dude, you don't have to do that. I said, but I don't get God. I don't understand God. I got condemned to eternal damnation when I was 13. I went to a Sunday school and we were studying the rapture and all this lighthearted, merciful stuff. Sunday school teacher scared the crap out of me. Said that, man, if you ain't been saved and rapture comes, you're going to be driving down the road with mom and dad in your car, and graves are going to open up, and people are going to leave, and your mom and dad's going to leave the car, and you're going to be left sitting there by yourself. I went, holy cow, this ain't good. And then he says, what we need to do is we need you to get saved. And I said, well, how do I do that? And he says, you got to go upstairs, and you got to go down and accept your Savior. Perfectly sensible, except for I was 13. And I had self-image problems. And I had trouble with personal relationships. And I was full of fear. And I couldn't control my emotions. And I had pants that were too big, and shoes that were too big, and a shirt that was stupid. And April Trader was upstairs. And I knew I was going to be embarrassed walking in front of all those people in that church. And what I did that day in that church was I went, eternal damnation for being embarrassed. And I decided to roll the dice with eternal damnation. Well, when you're 13, that seems a long ways away, right? Those people were wrong. Those people were wrong. You see, it took me 20 years to find that out. 20 years of ugliness and darkness within me, feeling that I wasn't worthy to go to God, feeling that I had walked away, that I'd left the flock, that I'd left the fold, and that took me out of the realm of mercy or grace. Even in AA, I never became convinced that I was worthy of the mercy and grace. I'd tried to live on a spiritual basis, and I'd failed miserably. And this guy said, maybe we need to try another approach. Maybe we need to try a different vision of God, a different conception of God. Maybe we need to start with what you can believe, and let it grow from there upon a simple foundation of belief. And I did it. And I made a prayer. I said a prayer one day in a mud puddle out behind my house. And what happened as a result of that changed my life. I became aware of the presence of God within me for the first time in my life. That hole, that void, that hole in my gut that was the size of a football went away, and I was filled with an energy. And I knew what it was, because I'd done exactly what this book had said to do. I believe very simply that the message of Alcoholics Anonymous, not in totality, but in a good part, is this. God doesn't make too hard of terms with those who are earnestly seeking. The realm of the Spirit is broad. It's roomy. It's all-inclusive. It's never exclusive or forbidding. It's open to all men. That's my experience. And when I've never went back, I've never doubted the existence of God since that day. I've never questioned it. And about 7 seconds after I experienced the presence of God within me, I said to God, you can do with me whatever you want to do with me for the rest of my life. I'm done fighting you. The most valuable thing I had in my life at that time was physical sobriety. 6 years of not drinking was the most valuable thing I had. And what I said to God, if you want me drunk, I'll be drunk. If you want me sober, you're going to have to keep me sober. I've never asked God to keep me sober one day since then, not one time. I've also started every day since Memorial Day in 1992 in prayer. I'd abandoned my life to God. Thank goodness I had a sponsor that knew what that meant. Because within about 4 hours of me making that decision, my ego was already starting to rebuild. And he said, are you ready to put your life entirely in God's hands? I said, I think so. And he said, what do you mean you think so? And I said, I don't know how to do that. And he said, can you count from 4 to 9? And I said, yeah. And he said, steps 4 through 9 are acts directly contrary to the will of the alcoholic and directly in line with the will of God. And I started to write an inventory. And I wrote an inventory. The 4-column resentment inventory. 230 names in the first column. See, I wasn't a very violent guy, but I was pretty angry. Man, it's kind of a phenomenon. Seriously. It's been my experience in working with a lot of people over the course of the last 20 years that those folks that have really big inventories have a tendency to have not so big 8-step lists because they don't ever really do anything to anybody. They just sit and look at you and smile. And they're thinking, man, I'd love to tear your ears off and shove them right down with you. But then there's these guys that you say something to them and it makes them mad and they break your nose, right? They don't have big inventories because they dealt with the anger. I'm not mad at them. Well, we settled that. Yeah, his nose is a little crooked too. Oh, yeah, I guess maybe I need to make some amends to him, right? So anyway, we ended up with this inventory. I did a fear inventory. What I found out in that fear inventory is I'm really only scared of 2 things. One of them I got absolutely no reason to be scared of. Never done a thing to hurt me. And the other one I should be very, very scared of. And those 2 things are God and me. We did a sex inventory. That didn't work out quite as impressive as I thought it might. But I've seen how I behaved in relationships and how inconsiderate I was and how I really was self-absorbed and only concerned about myself. And then we did a 5th step. I'd like to share with you, I came out of that 5th step and I couldn't really see the world. I couldn't really look the world in the eye. See, because I sat with 13 or 14 hours with this guy and I read this document to him. And when I left there, I felt sick to my stomach. I felt nauseated. And he's going to take me out for supper after I went home and took the book down and sat with it for an hour and done this stuff. And I met him for supper. I said, man, I think something's wrong. And he said, why? And I said, I don't feel good. I feel like I did at the first step. And he said, well, let's see. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol. We admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our life. I said, Joe, I admitted everything to you. I didn't hold anything back. I told you everything. I let everything out. And he said, Rick, you don't get it. And I said, what don't I get? And he said, when you go to the movie theater in Muscatine, do you buy a ticket that says admit 1 on it? And I said, yeah. And he said, are you paying them to let you in the movie or to let you out of the movie when the movie's over? And I said, well, to let me in. He said, that's because to admit means to let in, not to let out. And I realized that what I'd done that day is I'd let into myself what I'd done with my life and my power. Totally set the stage for me to be willing to have God change me. It took me a few years to really get the essence of the 7th step. To really understand that the 7th step is simply about, I really don't know what's good and what's bad about me. There are things that I think are really cute and charming about myself that most of you think are really irritating. And then there's things about myself that I think are absolutely deplorable, that I wish I'd never done, that I wish that I had never had any part of. And then I meet with one of you, and we talk. And you tell me what you're struggling with, and I go, oh, little bro, listen to this. This is what I did. And he said, man, you did that when you were drunk? I said, no, I did that stuff Tuesday. I've given up on getting good. Right? I've give up on it. My ex-wife, grandpa, was a deacon in the church, and a deacon in the Baptist church in Muscatine. And my ex-mother-in-law told me one time, she said, you know, Dad liked you. He only met you once, but he liked you. He said you were a jewel, diamond in the rough. He's awful ornery, right? And that's good. He said some people get so damn good they ain't no damn good to anybody. I don't think we ever have to worry about that with me. But the point is, I don't know what's good and what's bad about me. I can't tell the difference between the two. And it doesn't matter because I understand that anything about my life in God's hands ultimately can and will be used for God, for God's healing, for God's grace, for God's message. I just have to be willing to let that stuff flow, to let it go, to let it be. Because I'm going out from here to do God's work. It's not about me. It's not about my ego anymore. It's not about my achievements in life. It's not about my 401k. And then we go about the business of getting the list together of the folks that I've caused harm in their lives. I'm running out of time here, but I want to tell you the ninth step to me is pretty important. That I can talk to folks intellectually about the disease of alcoholism, about the program of action that helps us to recover. But what they see is something entirely different. Right? How they see me treating people is something entirely different. How they see me interacting with my wife and with my kids and with my mom and with my dad, something entirely different. And there's a spiritual truth here that when I owe you, I owe everybody. And that I can't get free of it. And that when I'm guilty with you, I'm just guilty. I'm guilty with everyone. And that puts me in a position where I don't feel like I'm worthy to be able to carry the message of recovery that AA has. So we went about the business of making amends to folks. I'd like to share with you the experience I had with my dad. When I was 6 months sober, I went down to my mom and dad's house, and I pitched a fit. I threw a pop bottle through my truck window, broke the back window clear out, cracked the windshield, kicked the side panels of the thing, throwing chairs off of the patio. And I don't remember why. I guess I'm just sticking with the winners. I'm still kind of smart aleck. My brother-in-law came out of the house and said, man, you're scaring your mom and dad. Dave's 11 years older than me. He's been around as long as I can remember. I said, you want some of it? I'd be glad to give it to you right now. He said, no, Rick, I'm not going to fight you. I said, then get away from me. It was much more colorful at the time. My dad came out of the house and said, Rick, get out of here. I'm calling the law. I said, I don't care. Call them. Bring them on. Bring every cop in Louisa County and tell them to pack their guns. And Dad's mad. They told me that on the day that I was born, my dad went all over the southern Iowa, all over the county, everybody he knew, and told them they had a boy. Mm-hmm. I never would, not 1 second in my life had I ever felt like my dad didn't love me. Not 1 second in my life did I ever feel like he was ashamed of me or he didn't want anything to do with me. Even when he came in my apartment in Orlando, I knew that he loved me. I seen him standing there crying. I knew that I had destroyed him. I knew what it took for him to cry. The only time I'd seen him cry before that day was the day that they put his mom in the ground. And on that day in his backyard, when he looked at me, he said, "Get off my property or I'm going to shoot you." I knew that I'd pushed him to a place of unreasonableness. Just like it says on page 18, that if a man has cancer, all those around him are sorry for him. But not so with the alcoholic illness. I got on this amends process, and I went over and I talked to mom and dad. My dad's dad died in 1940 when dad was 12 years old. And dad had 7 brothers. Most of them weren't much good. He didn't have good role models. He kind of grew up looking out for himself. He had strange ideas about what it took to be a man. Right? Like your word had to be good, stuff like that, right? If you see, he didn't care if you drove a Cadillac or a Lincoln Continental. If your word wasn't any good, you were a punk. You're just a bum. And I owed him and mom a bunch of money. I said, "Dad," I tried to make amends for the other stuff, and he said, no, we're not going to talk about that. That's all done. I said, "Well, we got the money deal." I said, "I got to pay you the money." And he said, "How are you going to pay me the money? You're raising 2 little kids." I said, "I'll give you $20 a week." He said, "Do you have any idea how much money you owe us?" And I said, "Well, not really, but I thought you and mom would know." He said, "Oh, your mom knows." "Honey," she said, "I'm coming." And she comes down the hall with this little green stenographer's tablet that's about 10 years old, and it's got every penny I ever borrowed from him in there, right? "If you get my car tags for me, I'll pay you next month," right? Yeah, car tags, 1974 or 78, you know. 10 or 12,000 bucks. I said, "I'll give you $20 a week." And he says, "Yeah, like we haven't tried that before." Because I'd pay him for a couple of weeks and then they wouldn't see me for 3 or 4 months, you know. And I said, "Dad, I got to do this." And he said, "All right, let's do it." So I went over every Friday or every Saturday for 3 or 4 months, $20 bill or a $20 check. I'd give him the money. And after I went over there for a while, one day he slid the money back to me. I said, "Dad, I got to do this." He said, "I know what you're doing." He said, "If I forgive you your debt, that means your debt's forgiven." He said, "Rick, it was never about the money. I just wanted to see if your word was any good." And he got sick. And because everything was cleared up between him and I was able to try to do for him, for the last month that he was alive, what he had been doing for me for 34 years. He died. My family asked me to do the eulogy at his funeral. The same kid that he said, "Get off my property or I'm going to shoot you." He said, "Rick, I liked you better when you were drunk. I thought alcoholism was your problem. You're just a mean SOB." We got healed up, and my dad got to go knowing that he had raised a man, right? That his punk boy had turned into a man. Somebody that he can be solid with, somebody that he could trust to look after his mother, right? That's what amends are. It's not getting the monkey off my back like I thought it was. It's about healing you. Taking the damage that I created you and letting that go away like you'd never met me.
you're in as good a shape as you would have been if you'd never come across me. And to just have bunches of experiences like that. And it's scary because we don't know what's going to be waiting on the other side of the door or on the other end of the phone. But I tell you, my experience is God doesn't make too hard of terms with those who earnestly seek. And I started to take the 10th step and the 11th step on a daily basis as I started to make amends. And people started to ask me if I'd sponsor them. And I can tell you that carrying this message is I just can't believe it. See, when I'm sitting with a guy or I'm talking on the phone with somebody and we're talking about who we are and what we've done and we're sharing the truth about ourselves and we're armed with the facts and we found this solution. And all I'm trying to do is tell this person that God's mercy is real and grace is very real. All you have to do is just reveal yourself to you. And in the process, God will reveal himself to you. Find out who you are and what's wrong with you, and the healing will happen. And in doing that and sharing my experience with them, man, there's a connection, and it happens not only sitting in a chair across from each other, but over the telephone it happens. When I'm sitting on the end of the phone and I'm crying and the guy on the other end of the phone is crying because we know some stuff, I almost cussed. You know, you guys have been to Woodstock tonight, right? Because I don't think I've cussed tonight, and that's a big deal. But when that's happening, I'm not having trouble with personal relationships. And I'm not afraid of misery and depression. And I don't have a feeling of uselessness. And I'm not scared. And maybe I can be used to be of real help to other people. And you know what? Being taken out of the corporate structure and put on a boat. I work on a boat. I work on a dredge by myself. I could have been a contender. Instead, I'm in a position where I sit on a boat for 8 or 10 hours a day dredging sand with my dog right beside me and my cell phone around my neck, because all I got to do is sit there and just watch gauges until something breaks. And when something breaks, I got to go to work. That's why they pay me $55,000 a year. It's when the stuff breaks. I can fix it in a hurry. Then I sit there and pump sand for 2 or 3 days and sit on the phone and talk to people that are dying from alcoholism and don't want to get well. And it's the perfect job for me. And I'm not afraid of making it. Can I make a living? And all that stuff on page 52 is gone. I can't effectively carry that message unless I've done this work. I'm going to close tonight. And I want to tell you that the love that I have for Alcoholics Anonymous is immeasurable. But that doesn't impress me as much as the love that my family has for Alcoholics Anonymous. The love that my mom has for you guys. The love that my dad had. When he was dying and I had to go tell him, Dad, you're dying. You got 13 things wrong with you, and one of them's going to kill you in the next couple of days. Is there anybody that you want to talk to? Any childhood friend, anybody that you want to talk to, I'll find them. I'll get them here. He said, all I want to do is talk to Lum. Lum was a member of our AA group that had gotten sober about 9 months after I was born. I don't know what Dad and Lum talked about. I got a pretty good idea. But the only person he wanted to talk to was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Then I'm sure he said, keep an eye on it.
He ain't much, but he's all I got, right? I'm sure that's how it went. The love that my sisters have for you guys. That brother-in-law that I was going to kick his butt. He's got cancer. My sister's a psychology thing.
And she teaches classes on death and dying. Cheerful subject, right? And her husband's one of her students. And he had to write a letter to two people that were the most influential people in his life. And all I wanted to do was just learn how not to drink so much. My children love you guys. I got a new wife. 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45 weekends a year since we've been together. On a Thursday night or a Friday morning, she said, here's your suit, here's your ties. Call me when you get there. When will you be home? I'll be home Sunday night. She says, keep your chi clean, right? And go tell them what this thing's done with you. And when I come home every Sunday, there's a pie or a cake waiting on the table. That's love. That's love. I don't get to experience that by taking up a chair in Alcoholics Anonymous. Because I ran into some people that knew what to do with me when my spirit was ready to be awakened. My life's been recreated. I didn't tell you that on the end of June of 1986, I woke up in an apartment on the south side of Orlando with a bunch of empty beer cans laying around me. Weldon hood lands and that rolled up $10 bill and some Peruvian flake laying next to me. And I just wanted to die. And I went home and I picked up my roommate's pistol and I held it up against my head. The reason that I did that day was because the lie that I was ever going to change was smashed. I knew that I was never going to get any better than I was that day. It was about a month after that day of my cousin's funeral. I looked over my life and I said, today is as good as it's ever going to get, because it's worse today than it was 6 months ago, and it was worse then than it was a year ago, and it was worse then than it was 18 months ago, and this is as good as it's going to get. And on that day, I reached the bottom that catapulted me to bring me to you tonight. I had nothing left. God bless you.